Number 10. Fear of wolves. From bedtime fairy tales, wolves were never the monster. But as kids, we were taught they were the teeth in the dark, the danger waiting just outside the warm glow of safety. The first time we heard Little Red Riding Hood, it wasn't just a story. It was a warning wrapped in fantasy, a soft voice telling us, "The world is hunting you, be careful." And we believed it. Because as children, our minds don't judge stories, they absorb them. With every tale, the wolf wasn't just a creature. It became a symbol, a shape that lived in shadows, a presence that watched from the edges of imagination. The wolf became the thing behind closed closets, the growl behind the silence, the reason we ran up the stairs at night without looking back. But here's the twist. Real wolves run away from humans. They're terrified of us. Yet we grew up terrified of them, all because someone needed a metaphor for danger. So instead of understanding wilderness, we inherited fear. Instead of curiosity, we learned avoidance. And this story didn't fade when we grew older, it evolved. The wolf became the coworker who looks intimidating, the unknown neighborhood, the new experience. Anything unfamiliar started feeling like sharp teeth and glowing eyes. The fear wasn't about wolves anymore. It was about danger without proof. Funny how childhood stories don't disappear. They just change costumes. So now, when something feels threatening for no logical reason, maybe it is an instinct. Maybe it's a fairy tale still echoing in your nervous system, whispering, "Don't trust the unknown," because the wolf never lived outside. It was built inside. Number 9. Fear of darkness from ghost stories. Darkness was never empty. Not to a child. It was a canvas where imagination painted its loudest horrors. One moment, the room was normal, harmless, and familiar. Then the lights switched off and suddenly, every shadow had intentions, every silence had weight, and every corner felt like something was watching. And the stories? They didn't help. They made the dark personal. Someone told us ghosts lived there. Someone said spirits wake up when lights go out. Someone whispered that the dead prefer darkness because that's where they can reach you. And we didn't question it. We absorbed it. Because in childhood, fear feels like truth. So darkness became a trigger. Not because it proved danger, but because we were trained to expect it. And even today, as adults, the habit remains. We check behind doors. We keep hallway lights on. We avoid looking into deep darkness because it feels like something might look back. Logic knows there's nothing there. But fear remembers the stories long after reality corrected them. It's strange how a simple absence of light can activate the most ancient instinct we carry. Prepare for the unknown. Because when we can't see, our mind replaces nothing with everything that could harm you. Darkness stops being a setting. It becomes a question mark we're too scared to answer. But maybe the darkness was never the enemy. Maybe the real terror was how easily a story can own the way you feel. Because darkness isn't alive. Fear is. Number 8. Fear of strangers from cautionary tales. The first lesson many of us learned wasn't kindness. It was suspicion. Before we learned how to shake a hand, we were told not to trust one. Don't talk to strangers. Strangers are dangerous. Strangers want to hurt you. These warnings weren't just instructions. They were emotional programming disguised as protection. And while the intention was safety, the side effect was lifelong hypervigilance. As children, we never questioned why. We only absorbed the tone, serious, urgent, fearful, and our nervous system learned to associate the unfamiliar with threat. A new face, a friendly greeting, a harmless conversation suddenly became loaded with invisible danger. And over time, that fear expanded far beyond the scenario it was meant to protect us from. So the fear didn't stay about strangers with candy. It became about unfamiliar people, unfamiliar environments, unfamiliar opportunities. The unknown began to feel unsafe by default. As adults, this programming still whispers. We hesitate before asking for help. We avoid eye contact with people we don't know. Meeting someone new feels like crossing a thin bridge over uncertainty. And sometimes the world feels full of potential enemies instead of potential connections. Ironically, everything we build in life, friendships, careers, relationships, comes from someone who was once a stranger. Yet a part of us still waits for the warning we heard as kids. Be careful. The truth is, danger exists, yes, but not everywhere and not in everyone. But childhood didn't teach nuance. It taught survival. And survival rarely leaves room for trust. Number 7. Fear of failure from moral parables. Failure didn't start as a real experience. It started as a story where the lazy boy suffers, the disobedient girl loses everything, and the slow, unprepared, or imperfect character becomes the example everyone is warned not to be. Moral tales were meant to teach responsibility, but somewhere along the way they taught something heavier. Mistakes equal punishment. As children, we learned that success made you the hero, but failure made you the lesson. And that's a terrifying thing to carry before you even know who you are. So we began to avoid risks. We colored inside the lines. We raised our hands only when we were sure. We chased perfection not because we loved achievement, but because we feared the shame that came with falling short. Failure stopped being a normal part of learning and instead became a looming shadow over every attempt, and the message sank deep. Get it right or don't try. Now, as adults, the fear still lingers. We procrastinate not because we're lazy, but because we're scared the result won't be good enough. We overthink before acting. We choose safety over possibility. We apologize for imperfect attempts as if trying itself is a crime. But here's the truth. Those childhood stories forgot to mention. Every person who ever built something meaningful walked through failure to reach it. Mistakes aren't proof of weakness. They are proof of effort, curiosity, and growth. The fear of failure was never about failing. It was about being seen failing. And maybe the freedom we're searching for isn't success. It's permission to try, learn, fall, and rise without fear. Number 6, fear of speaking up from strict teachers' stories. Before we feared public speaking, we feared raising our hand. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the possibility of being wrong in front of someone who held authority like a weapon. Some teachers didn't correct mistakes. They punished them. A wrong answer wasn't guidance. It was humiliation. And for a child, humiliation feels permanent, so we learned silence. Not because we had nothing to say, but because silence was safer than risking embarrassment. Every harsh tone, every sarcastic remark, every story we heard about teachers shouting or mocking students planted a quiet belief inside us. Speaking up is dangerous, and that belief followed us into adulthood. Now, in meetings, our ideas stay trapped behind caution. In relationships, emotions stay swallowed because vulnerability feels unsafe. Even in casual conversations, we rehearse sentences in our head before speaking, just to avoid saying something imperfect. What's tragic is how invisible this fear is. People think confidence comes naturally to others, but for many of us, it isn't shyness, it's conditioning. It's remembering how small we felt when someone in power decided our voice didn't deserve respect. Yet here's the twist. Silence doesn't protect us anymore. It limits us. Every unspoken idea, every held-back truth, every moment we wanted to express but didn't, becomes another brick in the wall between who we are and who we could be. So now comes the difficult question. Are we quiet because we're introverted? Or because a teacher from years ago still lives in our nervous system? Because voices don't disappear, they just wait for permission. And maybe now, it's finally time to give it. Number 5. Fear of betrayal from fables about trust. Some childhood stories weren't about monsters or danger. They were about betrayal. The scorpion who stabs the frog mid-journey. The fox who tricks the crow into dropping the cheese. The friend who promises loyalty, then vanishes when trouble arrives. These weren't just tales. They were warnings wrapped in simple words. Be careful who you trust. As kids, we didn't just listen, we internalized. The world became divided into two types of people, those who seemed safe and those who were pretending. Trust stopped being natural and became a cautious negotiation. Sharing secrets felt risky. Relying on someone felt foolish. We started expecting disappointment long before life ever showed it to us. And when betrayal eventually happened, a broken friendship, a lie, a promise someone didn't keep, it didn't feel surprising. It felt like confirmation of an ancient script. We didn't just feel hurt, we felt stupid for believing otherwise. So now, even as adults, we hold back pieces of ourselves. Not because we lack emotion, but because we fear handing someone a weapon disguised as vulnerability. We joke instead of confess. We detach instead of attach. We test people quietly, watching for signs they'll turn into the fox, the scorpion, the tale we were warned about. But here's the irony. Trust is the foundation of every meaningful connection, yet fear convinces us to build walls instead of bridges. We protect ourselves so intensely that sometimes we protect ourselves out of relationships, opportunities, and closeness. The question isn't whether betrayal exists. It does. The real question is, will we let the fear of being hurt stop us from ever being known? Because trust will always feel risky. But isolation carries a cost too. A silent one. Number 4. Fear of punishment from religious stories. Some fears don't start with monsters, darkness, or strangers. They start with heaven and hell. Long before we understood morality, we were told about invisible consequences. A single mistake wasn't just wrong, it was sinful. A bad thought wasn't just temporary, it was recorded. Somewhere, someone was watching, judging, keeping score. And for a child, that idea is overwhelming. We learned that perfection wasn't just expected, it was required. Be good, be obedient, be pure. And if you fail, eternal punishment, fire, judgment, a place where mistakes follow you forever. Even if those stories were meant to guide us, they often shaped something much heavier, fear disguised as faith. Instead of developing a relationship with values, we developed a relationship with guilt. We apologized for thoughts we couldn't control. We feared being wrong, even in private. And slowly, the world stopped being a place to explore. It became a moral minefield. As adults, that programming doesn't disappear, it evolves. We fear disappointing others. We fear breaking rules, even ones that no longer make sense. We judge ourselves harshly for being human, imperfect, emotional. The punishment may no longer be fire or divine rage, but the internal voice that says, "You're not good enough," is often louder. But here's the truth. Fear may control behavior, but it can't nurture growth. Punishment creates compliance. not understanding. Maybe what we needed wasn't warning, but wisdom. Not fear, but guidance. Not the threat of being unworthy, but the reminder that we are allowed to learn, stumble, and evolve without shame. Because life isn't a courtroom, and being human isn't a crime. Number 3. Fear of abandonment from orphan tales. Some childhood stories didn't scare us with monsters, they scared us with loneliness. Tales where a child is left behind, forgotten, or forced to survive alone taught us something subtle, but deeply damaging. Love can disappear. In those stories, parents vanish, families break, safety collapses. Not because of anything the child did, but because life decided to be cruel. And when you're young, you don't see that as fiction, you see it as possibility. So love became something fragile, something that could be lost if you weren't good enough, quiet enough, obedient enough. We learned to perform for affection, to shrink ourselves, to be agreeable, polite, perfect, not out of personality but out of survival. Because deep inside, a quiet belief formed. If I disappoint someone, they will leave. As adults, that belief still whispers. We overthink every message. We fear silence from someone we care about. We cling too tightly or detach too quickly. Both strategies born from the same fear, abandonment. Even healthy relationships feel unstable because we expect sudden absence. We brace for endings before beginnings fully unfold. And here's the painful irony. The fear of losing people often becomes the reason we never fully let them in. Those orphan stories weren't just narratives, they became emotional rehearsals for a loss we never experienced but constantly expect. But maybe now, the lesson needs rewriting. Love isn't earned, it's shared. Presence isn't fragile, it's chosen. And the people meant to stay don't need perfection. They just need you, real, flawed, unpolished, still enough. Number 2. Fear of curiosity from Don't Open This myths. Curiosity should have been our first teacher, but instead, it became something suspicious. Stories like Pandora's Box or forbidden rooms in fairy tales carried one message: questions lead to danger. The moment a character became curious, disaster followed. Worlds fell apart, monsters escaped, chaos began. And as children, we absorbed this not as metaphor, but as warning. So the unknown stopped being exciting. It became threatening. We learned to hesitate before exploring, before asking, before touching something unfamiliar. That internal voice, quiet but powerful, whispered, "What if knowing makes everything worse?" And slowly, curiosity turned into caution, and caution turned into avoidance. As adults, this programmed hesitation shows up in subtle ways. We stay in jobs that drain us because exploring new paths feels risky. We avoid challenging beliefs because answers might unsettle us. We silence questions in conversations because we fear sounding foolish or intrusive. We stop trying new things because comfort feels safer than discovery. But here's the paradox. Everything extraordinary we admire, innovation, creativity, wisdom, was born from curiosity. Someone questioned what existed. Someone explored what wasn't known. Someone ignored the warning that said, "Don't." Yet inside many of us, there's still a child afraid that curiosity equals trouble. That exploring will break something we can't fix. But the truth is simple. Curiosity doesn't destroy life. It expands it. The danger was never the question. It was believing we weren't allowed to ask. Number 1. Fear of difference from stories that mock outsiders. Some childhood stories didn't warn us about danger. They warned us about being different. The odd character, the strange traveler, the kid who didn't fit in was often portrayed as foolish, comedic, or unwanted. The message was subtle, but sharp. Belonging requires sameness. And slowly, we learned to shave off the parts of ourselves that stood out. We changed how we spoke, how we dressed, how we thought, not because we wanted to, but because blending in felt safer than being seen. We laughed at jokes we didn't understand, stayed silent when we disagreed, and copied the behaviors of those who seemed accepted. Because deep inside, we feared becoming the character in the story that everyone mocked. As adults, this fear still shapes us more than we admit. We hesitate before expressing new ideas. We hide interests that feel weird. We avoid standing alone, even when it means standing against ourselves. And sometimes we judge others, not because we dislike them, but because their courage to be different reminds us of what we buried. But here's the quiet truth those stories never taught us. Every meaningful shift in humanity came from someone who refused to blend in. Every invention, every revolution, every form of art was created by someone unafraid, or unwilling, to shrink for approval. Difference isn't a flaw, it's proof of individuality. Maybe the fear wasn't truly about being different. Maybe it was about being judged for being real. And now, the question becomes, do we keep editing ourselves to fit a story written decades ago? Or do we finally step out of it as the main character, not the warning? Because the world doesn't need more copies. It needs the version of you that was never meant to blend in.